इस बात का संतोष है कि प्रधानमंत्री के कार्यकाल में बार बार नॉर्थ ईस्ट जाकर के मैंने उनके दिलों को जीता है और वो मेरे लिए सबसे बड़ी जीत है। मुझे ये संतोष भी हुआ कि पूर्वोत्तर के लोगों को ये एहसास हो रहा है कि अब उनकी उपेक्षा नहीं होती। केंद्र की भाजपा सरकार में नॉर्थ ईस्ट के राज्यों को भी उतना ही महत्व मिलता है। साथियों, आज बहुत सारे पॉलिटिकल विश्लेषक बीजेपी की सफलता को समझने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं। कुछ हमारे विशेष शुभचिंतक भी हैं। इन विशेष शुभचिंतक जिनके पेट में ये सोच सोच करके दर्द होता है कि बीजेपी की जीत का राज क्या है। साथियों, मैं ज्यादा तो टीवी देख नहीं पाता हूं, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि शायद अब तक मैंने देखा नहीं है कि ईवीएम पर कोई गाली पड़नी शुरू हुई है कि नहीं हुई है। लेकिन ऐसे हर शुभचिंतक को मैं बीजेपी की सफलता का रहस्य बताना चाहता हूं। भाजपा के विजय अभियान का रहस्य छिपा है त्रिवेणी में। त्रिवेणी यानी 3 धाराओं का संगम। इस त्रिवेणी की पहली शक्ति है भाजपा सरकारों का कार्य। इस त्रिवेणी की दूसरी शक्ति है भाजपा सरकारों की कार्य संस्कृति और इस त्रिवेणी की तीसरी शक्ति है भाजपा के कार्यकर्ताओं का सेवा भाव। ये त्रिवेणी मिलकर भाजपा की शक्ति को 1+1+1 यानी 111 गुना बढ़ा देते हैं। हमने देश को एक नई राजनीति दी है, राजनीति की एक नई संस्कृति दी है। हमने सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास और सबका प्रयास, एक नया विकास मॉडल देश को दिया है। हमारे काम के तौर तरीकों में कोई भेदभाव नहीं होता। हम सबके विकास में भरोसा करते हैं। हम सबके लिए सेवा भाव से काम करते हैं। हमारी प्रेरणा है एक भारत श्रेष्ठ भारत। भाजपा का विकास मॉडल देश हित को सर्वोपरि रखता है। हमारे लिए देश प्रथम है, देशवासी प्रथम है। साथियों, हमारे देश में हमेशा से एक और पॉलिटिकल मॉडल रहा जिसमें पहले ऐसा कहते थे कि जो दूरदृष्टा होते हैं, स्टेट्समैन होते हैं, वो आने वाली पीढ़ियों का सोचते हैं। और पॉलिटिशियन के लिए कहा जाता था कि वो अगले चुनाव का सोचते हैं। तो मुझे किसी ने एक बार कहा तो मैंने कहा अब कहावत और बदल गई है। बोले क्या? मैंने कहा पहले जो स्टेट्समैन होते हैं वो अगली पीढ़ी के लिए सोचते हैं। पहले कहा जाता था कि पॉलिटिशियन अगले चुनाव के लिए सोचते हैं, लेकिन आज तो समय ऐसा बदल गया है कि पॉलिटिशियन दूसरे दिन के अखबार में क्या छपेगा इस पर ही सोचते रहते हैं। शाम को टीवी में उनकी तस्वीर आएगी कि नहीं, यही सोचते रहते हैं। और इसलिए जो आसान चीजें होती हैं, जो जरा मुंह में पानी छूट जाए ऐसी चीजें होती हैं, और जिससे लोगों को आसानी से गुमराह किया जा सकता है, उसी मॉडल पर चलने की फैशन बढ़ रही है। राजनीति के इस मॉडल में कठिन लक्ष्यों को हाथ ही नहीं लगाया जाता था। तब समस्याओं को ऐसे टाल दिया जाता था जैसे उनका कोई अस्तित्व ही नहीं है, समस्या की तरफ देखना ही नहीं। ये पॉलिटिकल मॉडल कठिनाइयों का हल नहीं करता था, बल्कि लोगों के जीवन को लंबे समय के लिए कठिनाई में जीने के लिए मजबूर कर देता था। भाजपा ने इस अप्रोच को पूरी तरह बदल दिया है। हम सबसे कठिन चीजों को हल करने के लिए कठिन से कठिन मेहनत करते हैं, और तमाम मुश्किलों के बावजूद समाधान के जो भी रास्ते मिले उन रास्तों पर चलने का ईमानदारी से प्रयास करते हैं। हम ये नहीं देखते कि इस काम को करना कितना मुश्किल होगा, बल्कि हम ये देखते हैं कि अगर हमने इस काम को नहीं किया तो लोगों का जीवन और कितना मुश्किल हो जाएगा। हमें दर्द होता है, हमारी नींद चली जाती है। नॉर्थ ईस्ट का उदाहरण ही हमारे सामने है। आजादी के 7 दशकों बाद भी नॉर्थ ईस्ट के हजारों गांवों तक बिजली नहीं पहुंची थी। साथियों, क्या 21वीं सदी में बिना बिजली की जिंदगी कोई कल्पना कर सकता है? पहले की सरकारों ने देखा कि वहां तक बिजली पहुंचाना कठिन काम है, इसलिए उन गांवों को अंधेरे में छोड़ दिया गया। नॉर्थ ईस्ट के लोगों को घर, पक्के घर, उनको नल से जल, उनके घरों में गैस का कनेक्शन ये उपलब्ध कराने ये पहले की सरकारों के काम की सूची में ही नहीं था, क्योंकि उनके लिए न तो उन क्षेत्रों की परवाह थी और न ही ऐसे कठिन कामों को करने का हौसला था। एयरपोर्ट, हाईवे, रेलवे, ये कनेक्टिविटी नॉर्थ ईस्ट में इन चीजों के विकास को भी कठिन मान लिया गया था। पहले की सरकारें कठिनाइयों से बचती रही और इसकी वजह से हर परियोजना में देरी होती रही। हमने इन परियोजनाओं को पूरा किया और लगातार मेहनत कर रहे हैं। हमारे ऐसे ही प्रयासों की वजह से आज देश पहली बार गरीबी के खिलाफ इतनी मजबूती से लड़ रहा है। और मुझे तो खुशी है कि मेरा गरीब भाई भी गरीबी को खत्म करने के लिए मेरे साथ कंधे से कंधा खड़ा लगा करके मेहनत कर रहा है। इसलिए आज भारत के विकास और उसकी रफ्तार की तारीफ पूरी दुनिया में हो रही है कि नहीं हो रही है? चारों तरफ गुन सुनाई दे रही कि नहीं सुनाई दे रही है? साथियों, भाजपा के विजय अभियान में जो हमारी त्रिवेणी की तीसरी शक्ति है, शिव जी के भी कहते हैं ना, तीसरा नेत्र सबसे सामर्थ्यवान माना जाता है। ये हमारी जो तीसरी शक्ति है, वो तीसरी शक्ति हमारे भाजपा के कार्यकर्ता है और मैं उनको बार बार नमन करता हूं। भाजपा के कार्यकर्ता का सेवा भाव अतुल्य है। भाजपा के कार्यकर्ता का श्रम और समर्पण अतुल्य है। भाजपा के कार्यकर्ता की पहचान उसके अनुशासन से होती है। हमारी पार्टी ने बड़ी से बड़ी मुश्किलों को देखा है। हमने कठिन से कठिन परिस्थितियों का सामना किया है, लेकिन हमारे कार्यकर्ता ने मुश्किल से मुश्किल हालातों में भी पार्टी का झंडा बुलंद रखा है। भाजपा जब कदम बढ़ाती है तो उसे रोकने के लिए उसके कार्यकर्ताओं को प्रताड़ित किया जाता है, उनके खिलाफ हिंसा की होती है, लेकिन वो राष्ट्र के लिए, राष्ट्र निर्माण के लिए संकल्पित होते हैं। इसलिए वो त्याग की पराकाष्ठा से पार्टी के कदमों को और देश के सपनों को कभी भी टूटने नहीं देते हैं, निरंतर आगे बढ़ते रहते हैं। जिस पार्टी के पास कार्य हो, कार्य संस्कृति हो और ऐसे समर्पित कार्यकर्ता हो, उसके लिए कुछ भी असंभव नहीं है। साथियों, आज मुझे ये देखकर भी खुशी है, हर चुनाव के साथ साथ देश की बहनों बेटियों का सुरक्षा कवच बीजेपी के लिए मजबूत होता जा रहा है। त्रिपुरा की, नॉर्थ ईस्ट की बहनों को भी मैं इस भरोसे के लिए विशेष आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। ये बीजेपी का सौभाग्य रहा है कि हमने नागालैंड को पहली राज्यसभा सांसद एक महिला को देकर के शुभ शुरुआत की। आज नागालैंड में तो पहली बार महिला उम्मीदवार चुनाव जीतकर विधानसभा पहुंची है। ये हम सभी के लिए, पूरे देश की माताओं बहनों के लिए गौरव की बात है। बीजेपी महिलाओं के सशक्तिकरण के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। पीएम आवास योजना में महिलाओं के नाम घर हो, जल जीवन मिशन के तहत हर घर पाइप से पानी पहुंचाना हो, गरीब कल्याण योजना के तहत मुफ्त राशन देना हो, आयुष्मान भारत योजना के तहत 5 लाख रुपए तक का मुफ्त इलाज देना हो, मुद्रा योजना के माध्यम से बिना गारंटी लिए 10 लाख रुपए तक की मदद हो, ऐसी अनेक योजना का लाभ नॉर्थ ईस्ट की लाखों बहनों को हुआ है। इसलिए उनका भरोसा भाजपा पर लगातार सशक्त हो रहा है। ऐसे समय में ऐसे समय में जब कुछ लोग मोदी की कब्र खोदने की ख्वाहिश कर रहे हैं, जहां मौका पड़ता है कमल खिलता ही जा रहा है, खिलता ही जा रहा है। कुछ लोग कट्टर की पहचान में लगे हुए हैं। वो हर काम बेईमानी भी कट्टरता से करते हैं। ये कट्टर लोग कहते हैं मर जा मोदी, वो कहते हैं मर जा मोदी। देश कह रहे हैं मत जा मोदी, मत जा मोदी, मत जा। साथियों, आज के चुनाव नतीजों के बाद आज के नतीजों के बाद कांग्रेस ने छोटों के प्रति अपनी नफरत को फिर से जग जाहिर कर दिया। कांग्रेस कह रही है और अध्यक्ष उनके कह रहे हैं कि ये तो छोटे राज्य हैं, इनके नतीजे उतना मायने नहीं रखते। जब दिल में ही भारत को जोड़ने की भावना ना हो तो ऐसे बोल निकलते ही है। ये इन राज्यों के लोगों का अपमान है, जनमत का अपमान है। छोटे राज्यों को इस तरह तिरस्कार की भावना से देखकर कांग्रेस बहुत बड़ी गलती कर रही है। इसी सोच की वजह से कांग्रेस ने हमेशा देश के गरीब को छोटा समझा, देश के दलित, पिछड़ों, आदिवासियों को छोटा समझा। कांग्रेस ने हमेशा संख्या बल को, वोट बैंक को देखते हुए राजनीति की है। यही मानसिकता है जिसने आजादी के बाद देश का बहुत बड़ा नुकसान किया है। जब हमारी सरकार ने गरीब के लिए शौचालय बनाए तो कांग्रेस उसे छोटा काम कहती रही। जब हमने गरीब के बैंक खाते खुलवाए तो कांग्रेस ने उसे भी छोटा काम बताया। जब हमने सफाई अभियान चलाया, कांग्रेस ने छोटा काम मानकर उसका भी मजाक उड़ाया। मैं कांग्रेस से कहना चाहता हूं, छोटे लोगों से, छोटे राज्यों से यही नफरत आपको आगे भी चुनाव में डुबोने जा रही है। आज नॉर्थ ईस्ट के नतीजों ने बीजेपी के खिलाफ वर्षों से चलाए जा रहे एक और प्रोपेगेंडा को भी ध्वस्त कर दिया है। आप सभी जानते हैं कि कुछ विरोधी दलों ने और उनके इकोसिस्टम ने हमेशा भाजपा पर एक लेबल चिपकाने की कोशिश की है। शुरुआत में बीजेपी को बनिया पार्टी कहा गया, हिंदी पट्टी की पार्टी कहा गया, फिर कहा गया कि बीजेपी सिर्फ शहरी मिडिल क्लास की पार्टी है और गांवों में कोई आधार नहीं है। समय के साथ इन सारे मिथकों को बीजेपी ने तोड़ दिया, लेकिन इसके साथ ही विरोधी दल ये कहने लगे कि आदिवासी क्षेत्रों में बीजेपी को उतना समर्थन नहीं है, पिछले 10 सालों में हमने इस भ्रम को भी तोड़ दिया है। आज देश का आदिवासी समाज ही नहीं, दलित और पिछड़े भी भाजपा के साथ है। अभी हमने गुजरात चुनाव में भी देखा है कि कैसे आदिवासी पट्टे में भाजपा को जबरदस्त जीत मिली है। साथियों, हमारे यहां बरसों तक माइनॉरिटीज को भी बीजेपी का डर दिखाया गया, देश विदेश में प्रोपेगेंडा चलाया गया, लेकिन अपप्रचार की इस झूठ की पोल गोवा के लोग खोलते रहे हैं। अब नॉर्थ ईस्ट के लोग भी इस झूठ की पोल खोलने में जुट गए हैं। नागालैंड और मेघालय में जहां बहुसंख्यक आबादी हमारे क्रिश्चियन भाई बहनों की है, वहां बीजेपी के लिए इतना जबरदस्त समर्थन लगातार बढ़ रहा है। वहीं नागालैंड में लगातार दूसरी बार हमें गठबंधन को आशीर्वाद मिला है। गोवा में भाजपा लगातार जीत पर जीत का रिकॉर्ड बना रही है। मैं जानता हूं जैसे जैसे कुछ दलों द्वारा फैलाए इस झूठ का पर्दाफाश होगा, वैसे वैसे भाजपा का और विस्तार होता जाएगा। साथियों, कुछ दलों द्वारा पर्दे के पीछे गठबंधन करके भाजपा को बाहर रखने का खेल भी आज देश देख रहा है। जनता देख रही है कि कैसे ये राजनीतिक दल उसके साथ, नागरिकों के साथ, जनता जनार्दन के साथ छल कपट कर रहे हैं। एक राज्य में दोस्ती और दूसरे राज्य में कुश्ती, ऐसा करने वाले राजनीतिक दलों का असली चेहरा जनता के सामने आ चुका है। केरला की जनता भी ये देख रही है कि कैसे लेफ्ट और कांग्रेस दूसरे राज्यों में गठबंधन करते हैं और केरला में एक दूसरे के खिलाफ होने का ढोंग रचाते हैं। सच्चाई यही है कि ये दोनों मिले हुए हैं, दोनों मिलकर केरला को लूट रहे हैं। इसलिए मुझे विश्वास है कि आने वाले वर्षों में भी जैसे नागालैंड में हुआ है, जैसे मेघालय में हुआ है, जैसे गोवा में होता रहा है, केरला में भी भाजपा गठबंधन की सरकार बनेगी। साथियों, नॉर्थ ईस्ट की विजय ने बाकी देश के कार्यकर्ताओं में भी ऊर्जा भर दी है। देश की जनता बार बार भाजपा पर भरोसा जता रही है। हमें विनम्र भाव से आगे बढ़ना है, हमें सभी को साथ लेकर चलना है। आजादी के इस अमृत काल में भारत को विकसित बनाने के लिए सबका प्रयास आवश्यक है। आइए यहां से हम दोगुनी ताकत से राष्ट्र निर्माण में जुट जाएं। त्रिपुरा, नागालैंड और मेघालय की जनता का मैं फिर से एक बार हृदयपूर्वक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं, उनका अभिनंदन करता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। भारत माता की, भारत माता की, भारत माता की, भारत माता की। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी। मोदी जी जय श्री राम। मोदी जी जय श्री राम। पूर्वोत्तर की जीत हमारी है। भारत माता की। अभी आदरणीय दुष्यंत जी कुछ सूचना देंगे आपके लिए।
सभी कार्यकर्ताओं से निवेदन है, भोजन की व्यवस्था है, नीचे भोजन कर जाएंगे सभी कार्यकर्ता।
तो जैसे सबसे तेज आपकी टैगलाइन है, तो इसी तरह से सबसे तेज हमारी सरकार की लाइफलाइन है।
Thank Mr. Puri.
I thank you for giving me the chance to address you.
Terrorism now a global issue.
The First Lady position is so unusual.
Never in my career did I ever see that love and affection in any other country than we saw in India in '79.
Pakistan has been responsible chronically for association with sponsorship of terrorist groups.
Hola from yet another day at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Now, quick weather update. It's gotten much better outside. Sunny days are here in Barcelona. Less chilly, but it's the opposite story inside the Fira here at the Mobile World Congress. A lot of the launches have already happened. So that excitement, that anxiety, that trepidation has sort of fizzled out here at MWC Barcelona. When I speak to some of the CEOs and some of the C-suite executives exclusively for business today, we found out that a lot of that action has been happening behind closed door. And some of the biggest customer engagements, partnerships are all taking place here at MWC because this is a big one. It's back after a long hiatus with such scale and at such a scale here in Barcelona. There's nearly 80,000 attendees, several exhibitors, of course a lot of them coming from China and the US as well. So this has become a true meeting ground for all tech enthusiasts and for the tech business at large. Now, in terms of things that we've seen over here, we've seen a bunch of phones and a bunch of launches like the Xiaomi 13 Pro, the Realme fast charging device, a OnePlus concept device, which I'm not quite sure will ever be a reality, but let's see about that. But the real showstopper over the course of the past few days has been at this stall, the Motorola stall. It's the Moto Riser concept. Absolutely mind-blowing tech. Imagine rollable tech in the palm of your hand. We can only hope that this becomes a reality very soon. We showed it to you exclusively on the first day and of course on our social media channels. But now we have an exclusive hands-on with the device. Have a look. The Motorola Riser concept that we hope will soon be a reality. What makes this phone really special is the minute you give it a double tap on that side, the rollable display now expands to this. Tap it twice again. And like that, just like magic, it's back to this traditional form. Now, there's a lot of use cases for something like this. I think rollable displays are something which will work in the future. We've seen how foldables are really hotting up as a space, even in India and on tech today. We've seen the Oppo Find N2 Flip and the Samsung Galaxy Flip 4, the Fold. There's all sorts of devices here at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, but we have this concept phone in the flesh on tech today. There's also a few other things that this phone can do. For instance, if you flick it twice like this, and now it's just, well, the rear camera, and I want to suddenly start using the front camera. There you go, I flick it again, and here's the front camera. And if you notice, when I did that, this display was untouched. It rolled further out there, the camera is revealed, as is the earpiece. You flick it back again, and there you go.
Co-presented by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Co-presented by Panasonic, create today, enrich tomorrow. Co-powered by CH, it helps. Co-powered by Sera, this is your space, play it your way.
Good evening, hello and welcome. You're with the news today. This is your primetime destination news, newsmakers, talking points. Tonight we're going to decode the elections from the three northeastern states that have come out. Verdict 2023's first big fallout. What does it tell us? Also, that big verdict that's come from the Supreme Court. Will the Election Commission now be truly independent? All that and more. But first, as always, it's time for the 9 headlines at 9. It's a big day for the BJP in the northeast. The party retains Tripura, sweeps Nagaland with ally NDPP, doubles its tally in Meghalaya. The Prime Minister calls it a win for the BJP's northeast outreach, says the lotus continues to bloom. Conrad Sangma set to become Chief Minister of Meghalaya once again, likely to partner with the BJP after having fought them during the elections. Congress wins in a BJP stronghold of Kasba Pet in the Maharashtra by-poll sends a strong message that the MVA alliance could challenge the BJP. The BJP retained Chinswad. The Congress also wins by-polls in Tamil Nadu and Bengal. Supreme Court sends a strong message to the Modi government, calls for the Election Commission to be kept independent, says Chief Election Commissioner must be appointed like a CBI chief, along with the leader of the opposition and a court representative. Supreme Court orders a time-bound SEBI probe on manipulation of stock prices in the Adani Hindenburg case, says report to expert panel within 2 months. Adani welcomes move, says truth will prevail. No consensus on Ukraine war at G20 foreign ministers meet. India says war is a make or break issue for the global south. Dr. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart discuss the Ladakh standoff in a crucial bilateral. UP court awards life imprisonment to Hathras convict Sandeep, drops charges against 3 other accused 3 years after the rape and murder of a 19-year-old Dalit girl in Hathras. Bulldozers roll into Prayagraj for the second straight day. Another house linked to Umesh Pal murder accused and aid to gangster Atiq Ahmed is raised. Australia needs 76 runs to win the indoor test after India is bundled out to 163 on the second day. Nathan Lyon picks up 8 wickets for 64 runs. But the big story coming in this evening is the BJP's big victory in the Northeast, which has been celebrated by the party at its headquarters by Prime Minister Modi, who in a victory speech a short while ago has said that the lotus is now blooming across the Northeast. The Prime Minister has targeted the Congress, went to the extent of saying his rivals want him dead, but the people of the country want him to stay. The Prime Minister says the Congress is declining because it undermined the Northeast, treated it like an ATM. The Prime Minister says Northeast won, next target Kerala. So clearly the lotus, according to the Prime Minister, could bloom deep south as well, is his hope. Of course, all of this comes on the backdrop of all that's happened today, but let's listen in first to Prime Minister Modi.
चुनाव जीतने से भी ज्यादा मुझे इस बात का संतोष है कि प्रधानमंत्री के कार्यकाल में बार बार नॉर्थ ईस्ट जाकर के मैंने उनके दिलों को जीता है और वो मेरे लिए सबसे बड़ी जीत है। मुझे ये संतोष भी हुआ कि पूर्वोत्तर के लोगों को ये एहसास हो रहा है कि अब उनकी उपेक्षा नहीं होती। केंद्र की भाजपा सरकार में नॉर्थ ईस्ट के राज्यों को भी उतना ही महत्व मिलता है। कुछ हमारे विशेष शुभचिंतक भी हैं। इन विशेष शुभचिंतक जिनके पेट में ये सोच सोच करके दर्द होता है कि बीजेपी की जीत का राज क्या है, लेकिन ऐसे हर शुभचिंतक को मैं बीजेपी की सफलता का रहस्य बताना चाहता हूं। भाजपा के विजय अभियान का रहस्य छिपा है त्रिवेणी में। त्रिवेणी यानी 3 धाराओं का संगम। इस त्रिवेणी की पहली शक्ति है भाजपा सरकारों का कार्य। इस त्रिवेणी की दूसरी शक्ति है भाजपा सरकारों की कार्य संस्कृति, और इस त्रिवेणी की तीसरी शक्ति है भाजपा के कार्यकर्ताओं का सेवा भाव।
So let's give you the numbers. What exactly happened today? Let's go state by state and look at how the BJP today scored, at least in Tripura, for example, a big victory, because while they are down by 11 seats compared to 2018, they still get a majority of 33. 14 seats to the left Congress alliance. But the real spoiler in a way for the opposition, if you would want to call it that, was the Tripura Mota. The tribal party got 13 seats. Had they tied up with the Congress left, they could have given the BJP a fight. The BJP actually went down by 11 seats and 11% in Tripura, but did just about enough because of a divided opposition to win the state, retain Tripura. Then we turn to Nagaland. Now in Nagaland, traditionally you've seen the state parties, regional parties do very well. This time 37 seats to the NDPP-BJP alliance. So the alliance of the NDPP with the BJP was the major party. 2 seats went to the Naga People's Front, but 21 to others, which interestingly includes 6 for the Nationalist Congress Party, 2 for Ramdas Athaule's party. Now, very often in Tripura, individual candidates matter, and these candidates are mainly in the others group. So the BJP will be in power sharing, but Nefu Rio, the NDPP leader, will continue as the chief minister. And in Meghalaya, it was Conrad Sangma who was the star of the day, because when you look at the numbers in a 60-seat Meghalaya, Conrad Sangma's party got as many as 26 seats, which is quite a remarkable performance in a state used to hung assemblies. 5 seats are with the Congress, 5 with the Trinamool Congress, among the that is in the 25 group, and 3 to the BJP. So net, Conrad Sangma and the BJP and the smaller parties will form a coalition government. Conrad Sangma, the big winner in the state of Meghalaya. So that's the big picture. The BJP will have its tent in Nagaland, in Meghalaya, and will be in power on its own in Tripura. No wonder the Prime Minister is celebrating, or the BJP is celebrating. Rahul Srivastava, National Affairs Editor, and Kaushik Dekar, Executive Editor at India Today magazine, join us to give us a quick update on what they see as the big takeaway. Rahul, what's your biggest takeaway? Is it lotus blooming in these states, or is it that a divided opposition will always mean advantage BJP?
Rasif, a few very important takeaways. Small states, but very critical. Now, the entire map of Northeast, if you look at it, the BJP has its fingers in power directly or indirectly in all 8 of them. That's not a small feat compared to 2014, when the BJP was virtually non-existent. Now, if you look at the larger national picture, what have we been talking about? The BJP has found itself become more acceptable to minorities, that is Christians in Nagaland, though to the political party or the affiliates like NDPP. They have no objections to BJP, which is largely called a anti-minority party in North India and other regions of the country. That's a feat for the BJP. Now, if the BJP is winning back Tripura, it has won largely because of the fact that there was a very interesting polarization between the tribal vote and the Bengali vote because of the Mota. So the BJP walks away with the Bengali vote, not the Trinamool Congress. Interestingly,
No, but the BJP,
this is
let
lies
me
that while
correct
the
you there. The
BJP has
fact
done
though
well,
is, there is a small, the BJP has lost 11% of the vote, including in Bengali
Yes.
areas. So the BJP has benefited in Tripura from a divided opposition.
see, it is divided, but still that polarization has worked, because if you see, the tribal vote has largely gone to
the Tripura
voter now this time around. Then if you look at it, we are looking at the larger picture, Rajdeep. The opposition, Trinamool Congress does not do very well in both the states. It planned to expand, and like in Goa, it has not succeeded. The CPM vote share has fallen from 42% in Tripura to 24%. Not very good news for the left party, which has been at one time the fulcrum of opposition unity. Trinamool Congress failing to expand, Congress party not doing very well. So for the opposition and the possibilities of an opposition unity, these three elections do not bring good news.
That's a very
While for the
interesting way of
BJP,
looking at it
definitely
ahead
there
of
is some good news.
2024. Opposition unity, the Trinamool Congress has taken a hit in both Meghalaya and in Tripura. The Congress left alliance has not quite worked in Tripura. Kaushik Deka, what's your biggest takeaway?
There are some corrections. BJP hasn't lost 11 percentile vote share, because BJP has lost 6 percentile vote share in Tripura. It has come down to 38. It was 44 last time, and only 4 seats.
No, with the ally. Kaushik, with the ally, IPFT, they have lost 11%.
Yeah,
with their ally,
yes.
they have lost 11%.
Yeah, so
we have to go by the alliance.
Okay, if we talk primarily about BJP, in fact, it's a better performance than last time, for the simple reason that last time, because of the alliance with IPFT, they had a sway in the tribal areas. This time, Tripura Mota took away 13 seats in the tribal areas. So despite that, they have managed to win 32 seats. So I think, is a mandate for the developmental work and the welfare schemes of BJP. Now, another interesting point is we are avoiding Nagaland. In Nagaland, BJP contested only 20 seats and they got 12 out of that. Last time also they had got 12, and they actually had wanted more seats from NDPP, the state unit of BJP. But the central unit did not give in to that. And now the state unit may actually say they are proved right, because NDPP strike rate is lesser than BJP strike rate. They contested in 40 seats, they got 25 seats, which is 1 seat lesser than last time. And more importantly, last time NDPP was not as strong as it is today, because it has already gobbled up the stronger party, NPF. Despite NPF, most of the leaders had joined NDPP. Despite that strength,
and also in a Christian-dominated state, the BJP has done well both in Nagaland and to some extent Meghalaya.
Yes, Meghalaya, I'll come to that. But in Nagaland, there is a possibility that Rio may get wiped off later in the term, because there are 23 members who belong to others. Someone is LJP, someone is JDU, someone is NCP. So these are, you also know that these are not organic parties, in the sense that these are all leftovers of other parties who just join a party to get a banner or a ticket.
Your takeaway of Meghalaya.
So the Meghalaya is, BJP has remained in 2 seats only, but the performance of Conrad Sangma has to be appreciated, because it was, he faced anti-incumbency, he faced BJP onslaught. There was an emerging TMC which ran a very high-profile campaign. Despite all that, and in Meghalaya, it doesn't happen quite often, that he has actually increased his numbers from 19
so he calls the shots.
26.
So you believe that Meghalaya will see a Conrad Sangma BJP alliance, but with Conrad Sangma calling the shots very quickly?
No, I do not think so. BJP will be equally at power, for the simple reason that BJP is in power at the center, and Conrad Sangma will also keep BJP happy so that he can run the government smoothly. Otherwise, if he tries to become high-headed, then you know how BJP functions. Over there also, they can gobble up other MLAs.
So you're saying that he will go back to the BJP, and
he has
the
already
BJP
gone back to BJP.
I have run completely out of time at the moment, but clearly today is a big day for the BJP in the Northeast. They are expanding in all states that have gone to the polls. and that gives them reason, as you saw with the Prime Minister's statements, reason to look forward to this big election year. Kaushik Deka and Rahul Srivastav, appreciate your joining us. Let's turn from there to the other big story of the day, which came from the Supreme Court, which today in a landmark judgment has framed the rules for the appointment for election commissioners. The Supreme Court made it clear that the Election Commission needed to be fully independent and has said a committee of the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition and the Chief Justice of India should select these commissioners. All of this puts a big question mark. Is the Election Commission in this country independent or not? It's our top talking point. First, take a look at this report.
A committee of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and Chief Justice of India will appoint the election commissioners from now on. A 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court has ruled in landmark judgment. In an unanimous verdict, the Supreme Court has agreed with a petition that the appointment of CEC and ECs must be done on the line of appointment done for CBI Director. The top court said that this must be done to make the commission more independent and to prevent any kind of interference in its functioning.
बहुत ऐतिहासिक फैसला है जो लोकतंत्र के ऊपर बहुत असर डालेगा, क्योंकि आज तो हम देख रहे थे कि इलेक्शन कमीशन बिल्कुल सरकार के इशारों पर नाच रहा था और उसका एक कारण ये था कि सरकार जिसको चाहे बना देती थी.
The bench headed by Justice K.M. Joseph highlighted the role of money power and criminalization of politics.
In a scathing comment on India's current political scenario, the Supreme Court has said that an election commission must be independent and cannot claim merely to be independent while acting in an unfair manner. At the same time, the court has said that the vast powers available with the election commission must be exercised in a constitutional and legal manner. This comes even as the Supreme Court has laid down the process by which the EC and the CEC must be appointed.
The opposition hailed the Supreme Court verdict, calling it a much-needed step.
The Supreme Court verdict, I welcome heartily. They can only save the country right now. It is only Supreme Court, our highest judiciary, who are the pillar of the democracy, who are our protector. Only Supreme Court can protect our democracy.
Supreme Court judgment strikes, slams the hegemonic, the control freak approach of this government towards institutions.
The Supreme Court order has put the focus once again on the independence of the EC amid a shrill cry from the opposition repeatedly that the institution, along with other agencies, have been compromised. Bureau Report, India Today.
Let's raise some big questions then. Will this Supreme Court ruling make the Election Commission truly independent? Will the Election Commission now have a free hand? Has the Supreme Court overreached? Some of the questions we'll raise. Joining me now, Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner, is with us. Siddharth Luthra, Senior Supreme Court Lawyer, with us. Supriya Srinath of the Congress. And Jaiprakash Narayan, founder Lok Satta, a movement that has tried to look for election reforms among other issues. First, you, Dr. Qureshi, how do you see the Supreme Court saying that the Election Commissioner will have to be appointed like a CBI chief, even wants the funding of the Election Commission to be taken out of the Law Ministry, separate secretariat? Is this somewhere suggesting that the court believes that the EC is not independent?
Well, these are reforms which Election Commission or the incumbents during the incumbency or post-retirement have been demanding for 20 years. I've written several articles. Even as CEC in media interviews, I had said that I would have felt stronger if Leader of Opposition was a party to my appointment. Because perceptions are very important, because that will create the perception that this guy is non-political and is accepted across party lines, which is very important. And as Rajiv, as I have said many times, that the most powerful election commission of the world has had the most defective system of appointment. We are the only country in the world where the government of the day appoints anybody. I was a beneficiary of that, but I've been fighting against it all these years. Now, the least they have is the collegium system. Somewhere there are select committees of parliament who appoint. In some cases, the entire parliament debates and interviews the candidate. In some cases, the candidates are interviewed on national television. That is how, even in the US, as you know, the constitutional appointment and even ambassador's appointment is approved by the Senate. So this wider approval of the nation is extremely important for an institution.
No, so
like
are you saying that this new system, you are saying, Dr. Qureshi, will create the perception at least that the election commission is independent just because now we have a leader of opposition and CJI involved in the appointments? And does that mean that the perception until now was that the election commissioners were basically government appointees?
Well, we were government appointees, and the fact is that people were often raising fingers also. Oh, this guy is an appointee of this government, surely will be soft on this government and will do the bidding of this government. We heard it so many times. At least that possibility of allegation will now disappear if this system comes into operation. Okay. But let me also, mention, the director of CBI was appointed by a split verdict of 2-1. Leader of opposition had not approved. I hope that when the parliament comes in, they will make it a unanimous decision. Because if leader of opposition has opposed a candidate, then not only the problem will persist, it will actually aggravate.
That's an interesting viewpoint, that whoever is appointed, the government and the opposition must be on the same page, not just 2-1, as has often happened with CBI cases. But Supriya Srinath, the BJP has chosen not to come on this debate because there has been a rap on the knuckles from the Supreme Court to the Modi government, suggesting somewhere that the government was diluting the independence of the Election Commission. But can you cross your heart and say the Congress didn't do the same? BJP leaders tell me what were, there were chief election commissioners even during Congress rule who were seen. MS Gill became a minister in a Congress government later. So can the Congress truly say that this is a problem that has only started post 2014?
No, let me first put on record here that why is the BJP not on this show? The BJP is not on this show because the government of the day, the Modi government, opposed this tooth and nail. There are writings of the judgment right before me, and they kept saying that the mechanism is so robust that you do not need anything, there's nothing rogue that happens. There are three things that I see in this judgment, and I will answer your direct question in just a bit. There are three big things. The first big thing is that the Supreme Court has effectively taken the control of an election, ensuring its free and fair play from the executive. The second is the timing, and I think that's very important because there are repeat offences as far as this government and the Prime Minister himself is concerned on the electoral process, whether it's blatant rules of violation on which the Commission has really done precious little. And the third is reminding India's election watchdog that you are responsible for free and fair elections and you have a position in democracy to ensure that. And I think on all those three counts, this judgment should be lauded. To answer your direct question, look at the kind of offences that have happened, Rajdeep, and I can give you instances after instances. A private company collecting election data in Karnataka, the government and the Election Commission choose to look the other way. An MLA in Karnataka are openly bribing voters. Multiple lakhs of complaints before the commission, but not one action taken against the powerful men in this government. An election commissioner compelled to give a dissenting view on the Prime Minister flagging rules, but the commission does nothing. I can go on and on about this, but the reality is that in the last 8.5, 9 years, rules pertaining to free and fair elections have been violated. This should be welcome, and not because this is Congress versus the BJP. No matter which party is in power, India's elections need to be independent, free and fair, not just by conduct,
you fully support this judgment
as well.
Okay, so you fully support this judgment as a step forward. But Siddharth Luthra, there will be those who will say that the judges have overreached. That tomorrow, the judges themselves appoint themselves. Judges of the Supreme Court appoint themselves. The collegium system is under question, but they are telling everyone else to be independent. How do you respond to that?
So let me answer that as a lawyer. We must understand that this judgment seeks to rely upon an old principle in the Vishaka case, where it said that if there is no mechanism, the Supreme Court can step in, create a mechanism till the legislature steps in. Now, the the Constitution says there can be laws to regulate this, the functionality and the appointments of the election commissioners. But the Supreme Court has perceived that there was a gap. And what's interesting about this decision is there are arguments made both for the case, which was made by the petitioners, and also by the intervener and by the Solicitor General, the additional Solicitor General and the Attorney General, saying that, look, there is a mechanism and the court should not legislate. So the legal question that we need to consider is, should judicial legislation be acceptable? Is it the appropriate method or not? Let me just tell you that while there have been decisions in the recent past 3 judges decisions saying that the Supreme Court can lay down guidelines, but the fact is that in 2002, a 7-judge bench decision was very clear in P. Ramachandra Rao that the courts do not possess the power to legislate. They cannot give directions. That was in the context of laying down timelines for conclusion of criminal trials, that you can't legislate. So that's the legal part. Now, the other interesting thing about this judgment is that it takes into considerations instances of appointment and how certain candidates were considered, the timing, etc. So it becomes a very fact-based understanding. After all, judges are not immune to what happens in the world. They had occasion, obviously, to see the relevant files. They're not immune to what the environment is. Thirdly, I must also add is, the point is, when the Constitution came into being, we've had over 100-odd amendments, but the fact is, we all, opposition and governments in power, parliament in essence, has to get about to do its business to ensure that we have robust, independent regulators, independent constitutional authorities, because that will add to our constitution. So it's not a case of one or the other. The pot calling the kettle black is what I would say, really, because you can't have one party. So today people are lauding the government. The people laud the government, but it's the same parties will have criticized the Supreme Court in an earlier era. The point is, the court has tried to see that there is a issue which it wants to resolve.
No, but you don't believe it's an overreach. Very quickly, you don't see it as overreach. You don't see that the judges are deciding. You might as well give the entire executive power then to the judiciary today.
Rajdeep, I have a concern about judicial legislation, which I raised at the outset. I believe it is not appropriate, and that's across the board. Having said that, there are moments when courts will come forward to point out certain things. I know, but can I to say that there is a lacuna or a gap in the system?
Can I stop you for a moment?
To have happened.
I take your point, but can I stop you for a moment? Because Jaiprakash Narayan, you know what the concern is? This is the same Supreme Court which has sat on the more critical matter, some believe, of electoral bonds. Opaque bonds that have resulted in one party getting a huge advantage. The matter is before the court. The court doesn't decide on that, but is happy to say that change the way election commissioners are appointed. Do you really believe that the appointment system will make election commissioners more independent?
Rajdeep, our institutions are obviously flawed. You outlined some in the Supreme Court, many other institutions. Nevertheless, our democracy is still robust. We must recognize that. The flaws must be corrected. I have been most vociferous in the past 27, 28 years in outlining the defects in our democracy and fighting for reform. It doesn't mean our democracy is illegitimate or completely lacks credibility. I want to make that point first. Second, the word you used is important, perceptions. I think our elections have been conducted remarkably well for a desperately poor country, largely illiterate, with no serious democratic experience in conducting elections in the past before independence. I think our election commissions, right from Sukumar Sen in 1950, have done a fantastic job. Because the commissioner is not the chief election commissioner or the two other commissioners. It's the whole body of public servants who may be flawed in the normal governance, but do a remarkable job as a matter of culture and practice over the past 50, 60 years in conducting elections.
I take your point, but is that, with due regard, sir, where is the level playing field? The level playing field doesn't exist if you have one party getting 80 or 85% of electoral bonds. If the Supreme Court is so concerned about ensuring a level playing field, why don't they tackle that?
No, I will happily address that. These are different issues. First, because there are now concerns about the conduct of elections, independence of EC. As a responsible citizen fighting for democracy and electoral reform, I think it's my duty to state that elections on the whole are robust.
Fair enough.
It doesn't mean there's no money power. It doesn't mean there's no criminalization. It doesn't mean there's no centralization of parties. It doesn't mean there are 100 flaws in our political process. They are outside the domain of conduct of elections and election commission. Neither election commission nor Supreme Court is God. They are not the answers to all the flaws of democracy. I want to state that first.
Fair enough.
Now, because you raised a specific question about the funding, let me tell you the details at what happened, because I am in many ways the architect of the funding law in 2003 after the Tehelka scam. I met every single major leader in government and opposition and persuaded them, at least let's take a small little step. We can't address the illegitimate money and vote buying in politics by this, but at least legitimate money required for legitimate politics, let's create a window. All parties came together. Congress formed a committee with Dr. Manmohan Singh to look at party finances. NDA, BJP accepted Manmohan Singh committee's recommendations in toto. A unanimous law was enacted. Mr. L.K. Advani gave a directive to his party. I was told authoritatively by the late Arun Jaitley, repeatedly, he was the law minister at the time the law was enacted. He gave a directive that now that there is full taxation available, let us not collect cash for party functioning. Within 3 months, the receipts fell by 90% despite their being in power. There is a bigger problem. It's outside the election funding.
Okay,
People have no faith that if they are seen to be funding a political party openly, they will not be harassed or humiliated or hurt economically.
So you're saying treat that as a separate problem. The money power issue will have to be tackled separately.
Absolutely, and it requires dramatic change. Okay. Electoral bonds is a minor issue.
I take your point. I take your point. I was only...
Let me complete, because there has to be clarity on this.
Yes.
Electoral bonds money, significant though it appears, is a minuscule in the election expenditure.
Okay.
95% is about vote buying and illegitimate purposes. In the recent by-election in Telangana for one assembly constituency, 400 crores was spent. More than the total expenditure incurred in the British parliamentary election by the two major parties and all the 1,300 candidates of all the 650 constituencies.
400 crores you're saying was spent on one by-election in Telangana. Okay,
I'm stating publicly.
I have limited time because we've got a major interview coming up in a moment with the US Secretary of State, but I just want final comments very quickly. Dr. Qureshi, let me give you an example though of what happened to Ashok Lavasa, who was a election commissioner. He had a dissenting note against Prime Minister Modi and he was moved out and he was with the Asian Development Bank. Do you believe as a result of what the Supreme Court has done, all of that will stop? Do you actually believe that the government will stop interfering in the functioning of the Election Commission?
I think the Supreme Court has not given a judgment but has suggested for enactment the removal process to be addressed, where these two election commissioners should be protected from removal like the CEC. And this has been a historical flaw because when the Constitution was framed, that Chief Election Commissioner was protected from removal except through impeachment. Now that protection was not for an individual. It was for the institution.
So you're saying all election commissioners must have that protection only through impeachment. Am I correct?
If that was the case, Ashok Lavasa would not have been removed.
Oh, I take your point. Supriya Srinath, you've been dying to get in, but I will give you a final point. Can I be assured that if there is a Congress government, we don't know when that will happen at the center in the future, that they will abide by these rules that the court sets? Very quickly, Supriya.
2024. Look no further. 2024. Just to answer your wondering part of it. But actually, I want to take the argument forward and say that a similar rule should be applied as far as the appointment of the ED director is concerned. A panel appoints the CBI chief, a panel appoints the CVC, a panel appoints the NHRC chairman and the Lokpal. Why should ED director be an exception? Because quite frankly, the blatant and the brazen illegal extensions and violations that have happened in that particular position's appointment is for everybody to see. We should actually extend this to ED. And
okay, so
your point about electoral bonds,
I take your point. No, Supriya, I've run out of time. You're saying I extend the same rule to the enforcement director. Siddharth Luthra, just 30 seconds. Do you believe this rule should be there, therefore, for the ED director as well tomorrow?
I believe it is important that all persons in authority, such as the ED director, their appointments must be regulated. It must be protected, because eventually liberty is sacrosanct. And if we have uncharted authority and power given to individuals holding positions where they can put people under coercive processes, you are going to have problem, and you see it in the reach of these agencies.
And what about judges? 10 seconds. What about judges? When will the day come when judges will also have to be put through a process of regulation where they don't appoint their own?
So that issue was tried in the NJC. It is not successful. The way the law minister has been saying, I don't think the day is far away when they're going to try and bring in a modified and updated version of the NJC.
Okay, so we'll wait and see if Parliament now strikes back and decides that even judges cannot appoint their own, just as the judges have said the election commissioners cannot be appointed only by the government. I appreciate all my panelists joining us on this critical issue on a day, of course, when we've had a big election. Now, the other big story also came from the Supreme Court, which has ordered a review of the regulatory mechanism governing the Indian capital market. The apex court, in its verdict on the Adani Hindenburg case, has now appointed a 6-member committee headed by a retired High Court Chief Justice, along with the likes of Nandan Nilekani, to ensure that SEBI conducts a probe into whether the Adani Group or other companies contravene capital market regulations, and give its verdict inside 2 months in a sealed envelope. Take a look.
For a man who has lost $80 billion this year, the worst is not yet over for Gautam Adani. The billionaire entrepreneur now has not one but 2 high-level probes into his business affairs, and both the probes are monitored by none other than the Supreme Court. The apex court passed its judgment after hearing several petitions concerning the loss of investor wealth due to the massive plunge in Adani Group stocks. Total wealth erosion due to sell-off triggered by Hindenburg research report has topped 12 lakh crore rupees last week. In a crucial order, the Supreme Court set up a 6-member committee headed by a retired High Court Chief Justice. The committee comprises known industry figures like banker K.V. Kamath and technocrat Nandan Nilekani. The committee has been tasked with providing an overall assessment of the situation, including causes and factors which led to volatility in the security market. The panel will also suggest measures to strengthen investor awareness. It will investigate if there has been regulatory failure in dealing with the alleged contravention of laws in relation to Adani Group and other companies. The panel will also suggest measures to strengthen the statutory and regulatory framework. Meanwhile, capital markets regulator SEBI will continue its existing probe into the Adani Hindenburg case. It has, however, been asked to investigate whether there has been a violation of the minimum shareholding laws. SEBI has also been asked by the Supreme Court to look into whether there has been a failure to disclose transactions with related parties in the Adani case. The regulator will look into whether there was any manipulation of stock prices in contravention of existing laws as well. The court has made it clear that its directions will not limit the contours of the ongoing SEBI investigation. Both the committee and SEBI have been asked to submit their report into Adani's affairs to the Supreme Court in 2 months. Gautam Adani welcomed the probe, tweeting that the order will bring finality in a time-bound manner, adding that the truth will prevail. The markets also welcomed the Supreme Court verdict, sending all 10 Adani Group shares into the green. The flagship Adani Enterprises closed up 2.8%. 5 of the 10 stocks hit the upper circuit. The surge in the group stocks added 30,000 crore rupees to the group market cap.
The next 2 months will be crucial as these reports will be filed before the court. After 2 months, it will be a big question for the Indian markets and the Indian investors as to what really went wrong and what will be done to tighten the system in the country. In New Delhi, with cameraman Ajay Thakur, this is Anisha Mathur for Business Today.
Okay, let's take a break at this point. On the other side, our exclusive tonight with our newsmaker, the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken speaks to my colleague Geeta Mohan. That's coming up on the other side. You're watching the news today. News without the noise.
I think there's an opportunity for India particularly to work with the United States and others.
India is has the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world.
I thought if it's blowing in the wind, it's best I'm on the motorcycle. And I did 15,000 kilometers in 36 days.
Rich countries have a particular obligation to exercise their investment in innovation.
I believe that global business has the money and the power.
Improvements in the way we understand the importance of education and healthcare.
You have a greater chance of killing yourself than of being killed by any soldier or terrorist or criminal.
There are some big names in the art world, like the ones from the progressive modern masters like Raza, Souza, Gaitonde, Hussain, etc. Some collect them as assets, some as vanity, some for the snob value, some for the emotional appeal. They appreciate well and fetch returns. Same with select contemporary artworks. Then there is a whole pool of emerging contemporary artists who cannot just be viewed from the lens of valuations. One such artist at the India Art Fair happened to be Vikrant Pisse. His art reiterates his commitment to the revolutionary spirit of Babasaheb Ambedkar. His work focuses on making powerful social commentary. The fabric of revolutionary times exuded. From his work, the call to action to uphold constitutional rights, to a social commentary on casteism with the Dalits in India, to depicting the landmark Rohit Vermila suicide case, the artist is working on a series on the legacy of the Dalit Panther movement in India. His iconography is informed and deliberate in radicality. A force of change to reckon with, Bhise's work stands out at the India Art Fair. In New Delhi, Chaiti Narula for India Today.
Welcome back to tonight's India Today exclusive. Along the sidelines of the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit in the national capital, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken sat down for an exclusive conversation with India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan. From the Russia and Ukraine war to US-India ties, listen in to excerpts from this interview.
This is an India Today World exclusive. The most prominent voice from the G20 ministerial is joining us here on India Today today. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, many thanks for joining us and doing this.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
The G20 presidency has begun at a tumultuous time. There are so many differences. You've been speaking about it. We've heard various leaders at various press conferences address the same issue. But the bigger question over here is that despite all the conversations and heated exchanges that we've been hearing about, there still is no consensus on the Russia-Ukraine war, no consensus on the communique. Now, in that, I'd like to know how and why has the West failed in isolating Russia? Why do I say that? Because Russia is still in the room, and in fact, you actually met the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov.
So first, I think it's very clear in a variety of ways that Russia is isolated in terms of its aggression against Ukraine. Go back a couple of weeks ago, 141 countries, 3/4 of the United Nations, stood up in the General Assembly and voted for a resolution condemning Russia's aggression and calling for a just and durable peace in Ukraine. Here at the G20, the foreign ministers meeting, if you look at the chair's statement that was put out by India, It reflects on the part of 18 of the 20 countries, that is every country except for Russia and China, the very language that was used by the leaders in the Bali meetings just a few months ago in terms of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So I think world opinion is very, very clear on this. And in the meetings today, I think it's also fair to say that a number of countries again called on Russia to end its aggression. And, you know, this is a concern not just for Ukraine, not just for countries in Europe. It's a concern for the entire world because the consequences of Russia's aggression are being felt around the world. People are feeling it in terms of higher energy prices, higher food prices, and countries are feeling it in a different way because there's been an assault not just on Ukraine, but on the principles at the heart of the United Nations Charter, principles that are necessary for trying to keep the peace around the world, like one country can't simply go and try and take over another, erase its borders, erase its identity. So I think it's very clear where the world is on this, and that was reflected here again in New Delhi.
But the aggression continues, and there is no stopping them. G20 has not been able to. US sanctions have not been able to. So when we talk about isolation, we're talking about absolute isolation of a country that is an aggressor. And that certainly doesn't seem to be the case here.
Well, I think if you look at what's actually happened, the Ukrainian people, with a lot of support from countries around the world, have actually stopped what Russia was trying to do. Russia was trying to erase Ukraine from the map, to absorb it into Russia, to make it so that it didn't exist anymore. That has failed, and it's failed because the Ukrainian people stood up and because so much of the world came to help Ukraine in defending itself. Since then, since that initial attempt to eliminate Ukraine as an independent country failed, Russia has been pushed back in Ukraine to the east and to the south. The Ukrainians have taken back more than 50% of the territory that Russia seized from it early on in the aggression. Unfortunately, tragically, Russia is persisting. It's true, it hasn't stopped. But as it's doing that, it is suffering tremendously. President Putin has inflicted terrible damage not only on Ukraine, but on his own country. Public accounts say that Russia has suffered 200,000 casualties, killed and wounded in Ukraine. And he keeps throwing bodies into this war, a war of his own making. More than 1 million Russians have left the country.
Right.
They tend to be the most educated and most sophisticated in building a modern economy. 1,000 companies from around the world have left Russia. They're not doing business there because the reputational cost of doing business has gotten to be too great. So all of those things, as well as the sanctions and export controls, are having an increasingly heavy weight on Russia. But ultimately, yes, the objective is to get it to stop the aggression and to restore Ukraine's full sovereignty. And that requires that we continue to support Ukraine and continue to exert pressure on Russia.
And it will take time. But you're here in New Delhi, and concerns of New Delhi and India are a little different. We're talking about China here. Do you think, because of this war, the focus has shifted from China and Chinese aggression, whether it is against Taiwan, India, or for that matter, now we see Chinese spy balloons in American airspace? Is that a concern? How do you see how do you see America counter China, and how do you see America continue being a net security provider for the world?
On the contrary, I'm seeing two things. First, as I mentioned, even as so many countries are working to support Ukraine, they're also working together, including here at the G20, to address global problems of concern to people around the world. And I mentioned a few of them, from food insecurity to energy insecurity to climate to global health, including in the wake of COVID, to make sure that that doesn't happen again. At the same time, I actually think that what Russia has done in Ukraine has awakened other parts of the world to concerns about other would-be aggressors. And the very reason that so many countries beyond Europe are standing up against Russia's aggression is because they know that if we let that aggression stand with impunity, then other would-be aggressors might say, well, if Russia can get away with it, so can we, so can I. And that, I think, is a powerful motivator. At the same time, tomorrow we'll be meeting with our partners in the Quad, Australia, Japan, and India. And I'm very much looking forward to that because we've done a lot of work to focus on issues of common concern to us in the Indo-Pacific. And the United States is deeply engaged throughout the Indo-Pacific with a shared goal that we have with India, with Japan, with Australia, but also with most of the countries in the region, and that is to make sure that we maintain a free, open, prosperous Indo-Pacific. And there are so many things that we're doing together to ensure that we're able to do that.
Okay, let's leave it there. We have more of that interview coming up at 10 p.m. With the U.S. Secretary of State. I leave you with the image of the day, the newsmaker of the day, Conrad Sangma. His father, Purnio Sangma, was Lok Sabha Speaker, but today his son has gone where his father couldn't. Not only has he won a 5-year term, he is now poised to come back again for a potential second term in office. He is the big winner on this day where the Northeast was the center of attention. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Good night. Shubh Ratri. Jai Hind. Namaskar.
You have seen Iron Man Tony Stark wear it to reach war zones. You have seen Shah Rukh Khan and John Abraham wage a war in the sky wearing these. Jetpack suits are now going to be part of military drills and rescue operations. The Indian Army will soon adopt jetpack technology. These suits will be used for enhanced tactical mobility on line of actual control amid border tensions with China. The Indian Aerospace Defence News shared a demo on Twitter of its jetpack flying over a water body, buildings and fields. Soldiers will be able to fly 10 to 15 meters in the air by wearing this suit powered by a gas turbine engine. They can clock a speed of 50 km per hour. Jetpacks were the center of attraction at the Aero India 2023 held recently.
अगर टेक्नोलॉजी के बारे में बात करेंगे, ये पूरा टर्बोजेट इंजन से चलता है. इसका डीजल फ्यूल है. हमने डीजल इसलिए चूज किया कि डीजल का जो फ्लैश पॉइंट एंड फायर पॉइंट है वो नॉर्मल एविएशन फ्यूल से काफी आगे है.
Jetpacks are being tested by armed forces across the world. These videos from the UK highlight the features of the technology. In the first video, one can see how a soldier lands on the deck and drops a ladder over the side for the rest of the team to climb up on. In the second, the soldier demonstrates the ability to quickly zip back and forth between the ship and the raft. And in the third, 3 jet suit jockeys land on the deck of a ship successfully. Jet suits are soon going to change the way wars are fought. Bureau Report, India Today.
foreign ministers of the world's most powerful nations are assembling in New Delhi for a G20 meet under the cloud of the raging war in Ukraine, and the divide appears far too big to be bridged. At one end of the table are the Western nations led by the US, and at the other end, Russia backed by China. The hosts, India, will be walking the tightrope. What will be on Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's mind is the failure at the G20 finance ministers meet in Bengaluru recently, when the group could not agree on a joint communique.
I don't think it would be really correct for me to prejudge the outcome of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. I think we should let the plenipotentiaries of the G20 foreign ministries meeting decide that on their own. For us, the questions relating to the food, energy and the fertilizer security, the impact that the conflict has on these economic challenges that we face.
How tough the task could be is evident from two statements issued by the UK and Russia. While London has said Foreign Secretary James Cleverly will call out Russian aggression in Ukraine at the meeting, Moscow says the actions of the West have put the world on the brink of a disaster. Now consider this. Two of the key players, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, have not met in person since the Ukraine war started. And the two sides have hardened their stance over the last few weeks. US President Joe Biden visited Ukraine on February 20th, declaring unwavering support to Volodymyr Zelensky.
And just today, that announcement includes artillery ammunition for HIMARS and howitzers, more javelins, anti-armor systems, air surveillance radars to help protect Ukrainian people from aerial bombardments. Later this week, we will announce additional sanctions against elites and companies that are trying to evade sanctions and backfill Russia's war machine.
Russian President Vladimir Putin hit back with a nuclear threat.
Armed with facts. Co-powered by Get quick loans from Tata Capital. Volkswagen Verter.
A lot of support. Russia is still in the heavy weight on Russia.
Industrialists. India Today scores biggest G20 interview.
Another very important aspect of what
Some very distinct things here that's important.
Top-level perspective on India's big rise.
It's been quite extraordinary in deepening and strengthening the strategic partnership between India and the United States. I think it's reaching unprecedented levels, and we look forward to demonstrating that further when Prime Minister Modi visits Washington in the coming time.
The world view on Ukraine, China and more.
Look at what's actually happened. The Ukrainian people, with a lot of support from countries around the world, have actually stopped what Russia was trying to do. Russia was trying to erase Ukraine from the map, to absorb it into Russia, to make it so that it didn't exist anymore. That has failed, and it's failed because Ukrainian people stood up, and because so much of the world came to help Ukraine in defending itself.
And on the decade's biggest relationship. Biden's Secretary of State on India Today. Antony Blinken speaks to Geeta Mohan.
You're with the news here on India Today with me, Shiv Arur. Let's get you straight to the top stories we're tracking at this time. No consensus on Ukraine war at G20 foreign ministers meet in Delhi. India says war a make or break issue for global south. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart discuss the Ladakh standoff in a crucial bilateral. Big day for the BJP in the Northeast. Party retains Tripura, sweeps Nagaland with ally NDPP, doubles tally in Meghalaya. Prime Minister calls it win for BJP's Northeast outreach. Conrad Sangma set to become Chief Minister of Meghalaya again, likely to partner with BJP once again. Supreme Court sends strong message to Modi government, calls for Election Commission to be kept independent, says Chief Election Commissioner must be appointed like the CBI chief, that is, along with the Chief Justice and Leader of the Opposition on the appointments panel. Bulldozers roll into Prayagraj for a second day straight. Another house linked to Umesh Pal murder accused and aid to gangster turned Neta has been razed. It's the big interview coming out of the G20 foreign ministers meet, an agenda-setting interview from the big meeting of 20 powers of the world goes live in just 30 seconds from now. US Secretary of State has a big message for India. In this exclusive interview to our Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan, Antony Blinken has spoken out for the first time on the Adani Hindenburg private issue does not affect our relationship, says Secretary Blinken. He also has a big message to India on the Ukraine war, for the first time explicitly stating that the United States is seeking India's support and help on the Russia-Ukraine war issue. That big interview plays out live right now. Here's Secretary Antony Blinken in this world-exclusive interview to India Today.
This is an India Today World exclusive. The most prominent voice from the G20 ministerial is joining us here on India Today today. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, many thanks for joining us and doing this.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
The G20 presidency has begun at a tumultuous time. There are so many differences. You've been speaking about it. We've heard various leaders at various press conferences address the same issue. But the bigger question over here is that despite all the conversations and heated exchanges that we've been hearing about, there still is no consensus on the Russia-Ukraine war, no consensus on the communique. Now, in that, I'd like to know how and why has the West failed in isolating Russia? Why do I say that? Because Russia is still in the room, and in fact, you actually met the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov.
So first, I think it's very clear in a variety of ways that Russia is isolated in terms of its aggression against Ukraine. Go back a couple of weeks ago, 141 countries, 3/4 of the United Nations, stood up in the General Assembly and voted for a resolution condemning Russia's aggression and calling for a just and durable peace in Ukraine. Here at the G20, the foreign ministers meeting, if you look at the chair's statement that was put out by India, it reflects on the part of 18 of the 20 countries, that is every country except for Russia and China, the very language that was used by the leaders in the Bali meetings just a few months ago in terms of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So I think world opinion is very, very clear on this. And in the meetings today, I think it's also fair to say that a number of countries again called on Russia to end its aggression. And, you know, this is a concern not just for Ukraine, not just for countries in Europe. It's a concern for the entire world because the consequences of Russia's aggression are being felt around the world. People are feeling it in terms of higher energy prices, higher food prices, And countries are feeling it in a different way because there's been an assault not just on Ukraine, but on the principles at the heart of the United Nations Charter, principles that are necessary for trying to keep the peace around the world, like one country can't simply go and try and take over another, erase its borders, erase its identity. So I think it's very clear where the world is on this, and that was reflected here again in New Delhi.
But the aggression continues, and there is no stopping them. G20 has not been able to. US sanctions have not been able to. So when we talk about isolation, we're talking about absolute isolation of a country that is an aggressor. And that certainly doesn't seem to be the case here.
Well, I think if you look at what's actually happened, the Ukrainian people, with a lot of support from countries around the world, have actually stopped what Russia was trying to do. Russia was trying to erase Ukraine from the map, to absorb it into Russia, to make it so that it didn't exist anymore. That has failed, and it's failed because the Ukrainian people stood up and because so much of the world came to help Ukraine in defending itself. Since then, since that initial attempt to eliminate Ukraine as an independent country failed, Russia has been pushed back in Ukraine to the east and to the south. The Ukrainians have taken back more than 50% of the territory that Russia seized from it early on in the aggression. Unfortunately, tragically, Russia is persisting. It's true, it hasn't stopped. But as it's doing that, it is suffering tremendously. President Putin has inflicted terrible damage not only on Ukraine, but on his own country. Public accounts say that Russia has suffered 200,000 casualties, killed and wounded in Ukraine. And he keeps throwing bodies into this war, a war of his own making. More than 1 million Russians have left the country.
Right.
They tend to be the most educated and most sophisticated in building a modern economy. 1,000 companies from around the world have left Russia. They're not doing business there because the reputational cost of doing business has gotten to be too great. So all of those things, as well as the sanctions and export controls, are having an increasingly heavy weight on Russia. But ultimately, yes, the objective is to get it to stop the aggression and to restore Ukraine's full sovereignty. And that requires that we continue to support Ukraine and continue to exert pressure on Russia.
And it will take time. But you're here in New Delhi, and concerns of New Delhi and India are a little different. We're talking about China here. Do you think, because of this war, the focus has shifted from China and Chinese aggression, whether it is against Taiwan, India, or for that matter, now we see Chinese spy balloons in American airspace? Is that a concern? How do you see America counter China? And how do you see America continue being a net security provider for the world?
On the contrary, I'm seeing two things. First, as I mentioned, even as so many countries are working to support Ukraine, they're also working together, including here at the G20, to address global problems of concern to people around the world. And I mentioned a few of them, from food insecurity to energy insecurity to climate to global health, including in the wake of COVID, to make sure that that doesn't happen again. At the same time, I actually think that what Russia has done in Ukraine has awakened other parts of the world to concerns about other would-be aggressors. And the very reason that so many countries beyond Europe are standing up against Russia's aggression is because they know that if we let that aggression stand with impunity, then other would-be aggressors might say, well, if Russia can get away with it, so can we, so can I. And that, I think, is a powerful motivator. At the same time, tomorrow we'll be meeting with our partners in the Quad, Australia, Japan, and India. And I'm very much looking forward to that because we've done a lot of work to focus on issues of common concern to us in the Indo-Pacific. And the United States is deeply engaged throughout the Indo-Pacific with a shared goal that we have with India, with Japan, with Australia, but also with most of the countries in the region, and that is to make sure that we maintain a free, open, prosperous Indo-Pacific. And there are so many things that we're doing together to ensure that we're able to do that.
Talking about another concern that India has, there has been a lot of criticism when it comes to the Indian government with regards to certain American businessmen and short sellers who have come out with reports that have not gone down well with the government, particularly massive losses to one of India's top industrialists, Gautam Adani, and then George Soros coming out and saying that the Hindenburg report will lead to a democratic revival in India. Was this matter discussed with your Indian counterpart, Dr. Jaishankar? If so, what was your response? If not, could you weigh in on the matter?
It wasn't discussed, and I think for a very good reason. These are private matters concerning private companies, private citizens, and they don't affect the relationship between the United States and India, the government to government, and the work we're doing both directly bilaterally, but also here at the G20 in support of India's leadership. That's exactly what we focused on today, the work that we've been doing, and it's been quite extraordinary, in deepening and strengthening the strategic partnership between India and the United States. I think it's reaching unprecedented levels, and we look forward to demonstrating that further when Prime Minister Modi visits Washington in the coming time. And at the same time, today the focus was intensely on the very ambitious agenda that India has for the G20 and the support the United States is providing to that agenda.
There's another very important aspect of in the Indo-US cooperation, which is health, the health sector, COVID-19, but the prospects are grim when it comes to reports that are emerging now. The US Energy Department has concluded that COVID pandemic most likely arose from a laboratory leak. In that, you've had many agencies report to you, send out reports. What can we conclusively say that Beijing indeed is indulging in biological warfare?
There are some very distinct things here that it's important to be clear on. First, President Biden was determined from day one to get to the bottom of the origins of COVID-19, why it happened, how it happened, in order to enable us to make sure, to the greatest extent possible, that it doesn't happen again. And in doing that, he asked all of our intelligence agencies to focus their resources and their attention on this question. And what we have now, after extensive study, is some of our agencies and departments believing that COVID originated from a lab leak in Wuhan, others believing it's more likely that it originated at a animal market, also in Wuhan. None of the agencies being able to say conclusively that it was one or the other. And so the bottom line is we don't know conclusively, but of course the possibility that it originated in a lab is very clear and very real, and that's what some agencies think is more likely, again, not conclusively. But that's also separate from the question of whether this had anything to do with a biological weapon and anything to do with intentional actions by a country to develop it, use it, release it. And none of the agencies, to my knowledge, have found that.
But do you see biological warfare as a threat coming from China separately?
We have real concerns about the potential development and use of bioweapons in various places around the world. We've been working for years to try to ensure that that wouldn't happen. There's something called the Biological Weapons Convention that we're a strong adherent to, and at the same time we have programs around the world to help countries that have biological research programs for medical reasons, for example, to make sure that they are fully safe and secure.
My final question to you. The US CIRF report under your leadership has been highly critical of India when it comes to certain categories, whether it's freedom of speech or treatment of minorities. Is that an area that was covered in your bilateral meetings with Dr. Jaishankar? And if so, again, what was India's response to it?
We have an ongoing dialogue on both of our democracies and human rights, because as the world's two largest democracies, it's central to who we are. It's central to our identity. And in our own case, we've had, from day one of our own democracy, our founding fathers set as an objective to try to form a more perfect union, which is an acknowledgement that we're not perfect, we never will be, but it's in trying to do ever better on democracy, on human rights, that we make progress. And I think that's a shared commitment that both of us have. And when questions or issues come up, we discuss them directly, very openly, very freely. I think we would hold each other to account when there are concerns. And that's, I think, typical of many of our conversations, and came up today as well. But the point is that we're engaging on these issues directly, as friends, as partners, and I believe and hope working to make sure that both of our societies continue to get stronger when it comes to our democracies and when it comes to human rights.
Secretary Blinken, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today and for this very candid conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Very good to be with you. Appreciate it.
On the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meet in Delhi, the Russia-Ukraine war remained the single biggest elephant in the room on day one. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar addressed the global impact of the war and stated that while the G20 focused on strengthening multilateralism, the war's impact has largely affected the global south. Meanwhile, Dr. Jaishankar also held a bilateral meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang, the first ever since the 2020 Ladakh standoff. Let's take a look at this report by India Today's Geeta Mohan.
The global stage shifted to India, and with that, India sought to bring the global south, the developing world, on international agenda.
It has been our endeavor to ensure that the voice of the global south is heard on the G20 table.
But the Ukraine conflict didn't let that happen as it should have. Tensions between Europe and America on one side and Russia on the other dominated the meeting of G20 foreign ministers in New Delhi. The end result? The world's rich and powerful nations largely sidestepped issues the global south faces. No consensus, no joint communique. The US and its European allies remained engaged in trading diplomatic blows with Russia over its invasion of Ukraine.
Did we fall short of expectations? Why is it called what it is? There were issues, and I think the issues, I would say, very frankly, concerned the Ukraine conflict, on which there were divergences. There was a chair summary because there were differences on the Ukraine issue, which we could not reconcile between various parties who held differing positions. Is it, is the conflict impacting the global south? Of course it is. For much of the global south, this is a make or break issue. That the costs of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of fertilizer, the availability of fertilizer, which means next year's food, these are all extremely pressing issues. And if you see some of the countries who were already struggling with debt, who were already impacted by the pandemic, for them, this conflict, the knock-on effects of this conflict coming on top of that, has been really, damaging is a very, very mild word.
The sparring came despite host India urging the G20 to bury its differences and instead focus its attention on the global south.
After years of progress, we are at risk today of moving back on the Sustainable Development Goals. Many developing countries are struggling with unsustainable debt while trying to ensure food and energy security for their people.
On the margins of the two-day international event, India, however, held significant bilaterals with visiting ministers. Among them, with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and China's Qin Gang. At the one-on-one with Chinese Foreign Minister during his visit, border issues dominated the talks. Remember, ties between the two Asian giants have strained since the Ladakh military standoff in May 2020.
The thrust of the meeting was really on our bilateral relationship and the challenges in the bilateral relationship, especially that of peace and tranquility in the border areas.
A leading voice of the developing world, India, on its part, prioritized global food and energy security and development cooperation on world stage, and firmly told China that peace along the border held the key to normalizing ties between the two neighbors. With Geeta Mohan in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
Keep watching India Today. The news continues on the other side of this very short break.
All successful people worked hard, nothing comes easily.
Sometimes you need to just cross that mental barrier.
Once I come in,
काफी प्रोसेस ओरिएंटेड
stark difference.
मैं जब दोनों मेडल को ले रहा था और मैं बोल रहा था कि दो ही हमारे पास मेडल है इंडिया में और दोनों आज मेरे हाथ में हैं.
The very fact that you're opening the India Today conclave with a session on Olympic sport tells me that we've made progress.
सरकार की जीरो टॉलरेंस की नीति है और उन माफियाओं के खिलाफ मिट्टी में मिलाने का काम उनको हमारी सरकार करेगी.
Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath is quite literally turning the mafia to dust. Days after shooting off a warning to gangsters, Bulldozer Baba, as he's been tagged off late, is back. Days after the shocking murder of prime witness Umesh Pal, the crackdown on gangster Atiq Ahmed and his aides has touched top gear. Today in Prayagraj, bulldozers rolled down the streets and targeted Ahmed's aide Khalid Zafar as his 2.5 crore property, according to authorities, was illegal.
ये मकान बनाया गया था जिसका नक्शा पास नहीं था और इसको लेकर के प्रयागराज विकास प्राधिकरण नोटिस देता रहा, लेकिन नोटिस का जवाब नहीं दिया गया. और अब जब प्रशासन ने, प्रयागराज विकास प्राधिकरण ने अवैध निर्माण के साथ साथ उमेश पाल मर्डर केस का क्राइम एंगल भी टटोल लिया है, क्राइम एंगल पता कर लिया है, तो उसके बाद से, क्राइम एंगल पता करने के बाद से अब ये माना जा रहा है कि ये बुलडोजर की कार्रवाई है. ये अभी शुरुआत है उन लोगों की जो अतीक अहमद या उमेश पाल मर्डर केस में मददगार थे, पनाहगार थे.
It was in this two-storied house that the killers of witness Umesh Pal hid after committing the murder on Saturday. Before the house was completely razed down, arms were recovered from inside. Guns and swords were seized, and cops believe all of it belonged to Atiq Ahmed and his gang.
ये उसके घर से ये असलहा मिला है, ये असलहा लेकर के जा रहे हैं. ये कौन
के घर से मिला है?
घर से मिला.
घर से मिला.
क्या मिला? ये कौन सी बंदूक?
इसके अलावा एक और गन थी अभी, वो भी मिली है. दो मिली है. एक तलवार मिली है.
अच्छा, तो ये कौन सी, क्या मिला इनके पास?
ज्यादा आइडिया नहीं है, विदेशी गन है, ज्यादा आइडिया नहीं.
The UP government has meanwhile defended the bulldozer drive, even as the move has been slammed by the opposition. CM Yogi Adityanath made it clear he will continue with this drive, come what may.
हर समस्या के दो समाधान, भाग लो या तो उसे चुनौती के रूप में स्वीकार करते हुए उसका सामना करो, उस प्रकार की कार्य योजना बनाओ और उसके समाधान के स्तर पर पहुंचाओ, जैसे कि 6 वर्ष के अंदर किया गया.
जो अपराधी है और उसके खिलाफ कार्रवाई करना, यह पुलिस प्रशासन का दायित्व भी है. और जो अपराध हुआ है प्रयागराज में श्री उमेश पाल जी की हत्या का, वह साधारण अपराध नहीं है.
हर रोज लॉ एंड ऑर्डर इनका जीरो टॉलरेंस फेल होता जा रहा है और हर जिले में घटनाएं बढ़ रही है और इनका बुलडोजर पूरी तरह फेल है.
Hello and welcome. You with us here on Business Today. I'm Abha Bakaya. Here are the headlines tonight. Supreme Court orders review of the capital markets regulatory framework after the Adani stocks fiasco. 6-member committee will submit its report in 2 months. SEBI asked to widen its probe into the Hindenburg allegations. Markets in the red even as Adani stocks buck the trend. Tech, banks and auto shares drag benchmarks lower. Sensex down 500 points, Nifty down 129 points. Maruti Suzuki prepares for more production pain this month, says semiconductor shortage still hitting operations hard, warns consumers to be ready for a price rise with new pollution norms taking effect from April. It's a big Business Today TV exclusive. The much anticipated revamp in capital gains tax regime will not be happening anytime soon. Finance Ministry officials say mood and sentiment of the market is not right to take a big step. Tech wunderkind Elon Musk terms artificial intelligence dangerous, calls for a regulatory authority to keep a check on it, says he's sorry for his role in its development. In a major decision, the Supreme Court has ordered a review of the regulatory mechanism governing the Indian capital market. The apex court, in its verdict on the Adani Hindenburg case, appointed a 6-member committee. Along with SEBI, the committee will conduct a parallel probe into whether the Adani Group or other companies contravened capital market regulations.
For a man who has lost $80 billion this year, the worst is not yet over for Gautam Adani. The billionaire entrepreneur now has not one but 2 high-level probes into his business affairs, and both the probes are monitored by none other than the Supreme Court. The apex court passed its judgment after hearing several petitions concerning the loss of investor wealth due to the massive plunge in Adani Group stocks. Total wealth erosion due to sell-off triggered by Hindenburg research report has topped 12 lakh crore rupees last week. In a crucial order, the Supreme Court set up a 6-member committee headed by a retired Supreme Court judge. The committee comprises known industry figures like banker K.V. Kamath and technocrat Nandan Nilekani. The committee has been tasked with providing an overall assessment of the situation, including causes and factors which led to volatility in the security market. The panel will also suggest measures to strengthen investor awareness. It will investigate if there has been regulatory failure in dealing with the alleged contravention of laws in relation to Adani Group and other companies. The panel will also suggest measures to strengthen the statutory and regulatory framework. Meanwhile, capital markets regulator SEBI will continue its existing probe into the Adani Hindenburg case. It has, however, been asked to investigate whether there has been a violation of the minimum shareholding laws. SEBI has also been asked by the Supreme Court to look into whether there has been a failure to disclose transactions with related parties in the Adani case. The regulator will look into whether there was any manipulation of stock prices in contravention of existing laws as well. The court has made it clear that its directions will not limit the contours of the ongoing SEBI investigation. Both the committee and SEBI have been asked to submit their report into Adani's affairs to the Supreme Court in 2 months. Gautam Adani welcomed the probe, tweeting that the order will bring finality in a time-bound manner, adding that the truth will prevail. The markets also welcomed the Supreme Court verdict, sending all 10 Adani Group shares into the green. The flagship Adani Enterprises closed up 2.8%. 5 of the 10 stocks hit the upper circuit. The surge in the group stocks added 30,000 crore rupees to the group market cap.
The next 2 months will be crucial as these reports will be filed before the court. After 2 months, it will be a big question for the Indian markets and the Indian investors as to what really went wrong and what will be done to tighten the system in the country. In New Delhi, with cameraman Ajay Thakur, this is Anisha Mathur for Business Today.
So who are the 6 panel members? Business Today TV has these details for you. The committee is headed by Justice A.M. Sapre, who is veteran jurist, having served as the Chief Justice at the Guwahati High Court and the Manipur High Court. The other jurist on the panel is Justice J.B. Devadar, who has been the counsel of the Union of India since 1982. He is an expert in tax laws along with constitutional law and other branches of civil law. K.V. Kamath is a veteran Indian banker who started his career with the ICICI Bank and headed it for a long time. He's held several coveted positions, including Chief of the New Development Bank of BRICS countries, Chairman of Infosys, Independent Director at Reliance Industries, and more. O.P. Bhatt is the former Chairman of the State Bank of India and is an Independent Director on the boards of a variety of multinationals, including Hindustan Unilever, TCS, Tata Steel, and Tata Motors. Nandan Nilekani is the co-founder and chairman of Infosys. He was the founding chairman of the Unique Identification Authority of India and held the rank of cabinet minister from 2009 to 2014. Somashekaran Sundaresan, a former journalist, has been a member of several committees set up by the government, SEBI and RBI. He's currently serving on the advisory committee of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India on corporate insolvency and liquidation. So what does the Supreme Court verdict really mean? Does it imply a big change is coming in the regulatory framework? To answer these questions, we're joined by one of the top legal luminaries in India, Ryan Karanjiwala, Managing Partner of Karanjiwala & Co. Ryan, thanks so much for being with us on the show today. I've been looking forward to first getting your reaction to the Supreme Court's statements today and the fact that they've had to come in on this entire issue. I mean, does this imply that somewhere SEBI was lacking in its investigation, that we've had the apex court step in to probe the manipulation of stocks here?
So before I begin, let me just make one disclosure, which is that Adani is a client of mine. But nevertheless, now I'll answer your question straight away. Yeah. To the question as to whether you felt that the Supreme Court thought that SEBI was lacking in what it was doing, it's a bit of a yes and no answer, because SEBI came to the court and said, look, we are investigating into a host of these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the Supreme Court has said, please continue with the investigation. So that investigation has not been stopped. At the same time, the Supreme Court added 3 other things which they should also investigate into, since they hadn't specifically said they were investigating into it. One was a violation of Rule 19A of the Securities Contract Regulation Act, which is whether the 75% public holding, the 75% private holding regulation has been violated, whether there has been a failure to disclose transactions with related parties, this is all in the Adani context, and whether there was any manipulation of stock prices in contravention of existing laws. So what the Supreme Court first has done is, it has strengthened and tasked SEBI with looking into far more things, or looking into things which it wanted SEBI to look into, in addition to what SEBI was already looking into. That's one. 2, as far as the committee is concerned, the remit of the committee is both micro and macro. While SEBI looks into and reports to the committee and keeps the committee in the loop in what was happening vis-a-vis the Adani Group, as far as the committee itself is concerned, they've been asked to give an overall assessment of the situation, including the relevant causal factors, to suggest ways of strengthening investor awareness. So basically, they have been asked to suggest ways to strengthen the institution of stock trading in the country. And they have also been asked to see as to whether in dealing with this, there was any regulatory failure insofar as the alleged contravention of laws by the Adani. That's what has happened.
Sure. Ryan, to what extent is the Supreme Court also taking note of all the PILs that have come in against the group, versus this being a reaction perhaps to the SEBI report? As you just said, it's really expanded the scope. But what is going to be the due process now? Are we going to wait for the SEBI report to come out? Yeah. What happens next?
The SEBI will continue. They will keep the committee in the loop. The committee will look at what SEBI has also said, because they'll have to look at some of the findings. See, in seeing as to whether there's been a regulatory failure or not, they will have to see what findings SEBI comes to. Because if SEBI comes to say yes, there was this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong, then the committee, in deciding what the regulatory failure was, will have to look at everything they've said. If SEBI says no, everything was kosher, then again the committee will have to look at what SEBI is saying before they come out with their report. So essentially, this is a situation where the Supreme Court has chosen a hand-picked committee, which it has great faith in, and which I think is an excellent committee, and tasked it with the situation of looking at the macro level problems and also seeing as to what SEBI has said as far as the micro level issue is concerned, which is the Adani. And as far as the constitution of the committee is concerned, if I can just venture to say, I don't think they could have found a better committee. And the reason I'm saying it is that this is a situation where everything was being looked at not only within India but also internationally, because this is as you know, it came up from the whole thing started with the Heidelberg report, which is a US-based company, US-based think tank. So essentially, everyone knew from the beginning that whatever happened in India would also be looked at in the rest of the world. Now, when choosing its committee, the Supreme Court has been very, very careful. They have put on the committee 3 people with an international reputation. Nandan Nilekani, internationally known in India and abroad. Mr. O.P. Bhatt, former chairman of the State Bank of India, then the chairman of the Indian Banking Association, and on several international company boards, Tata Motors, Tata Steel, TCS, etc. Then you have K.V. Kamath, who not only headed ICICI Bank, but was also in charge of the BRICS Development Bank. So you have people who have international stature and whose word will be accepted not only within India, but also internationally. As far as the judicial members are concerned, you have a judge of the Supreme Court with huge experience. For example, Justice Sapre has been a judge of 3 separate high courts, a chief justice of 2 other high courts, and in addition to that has been a judge of the Supreme Court. The other judge, Justice J.P. Devdar, is an expert in matters pertaining to SEBI. Somashekaran is a SEBI lawyer and a SEBI expert again in matters pertaining to SEBI. So you have a committee which has high credentials and is very well equipped to deal with the issues at hand and come out with the suggestions for the future. That's how I see it.
Why the entire question around having a sealed envelope around the committee, Ryan? They clearly said that they weren't going to allow a sealed envelope. It had to be transparent. Did we need to go through that whole process?
So that is a question that will sort of, maybe they'll give their report in a sealed envelope, and then it's for the Supreme Court to decide what to do with that sealed envelope. That's a question mark for the future.
Okay, fair enough. In terms of some of the ramifications, firstly, of course, we have a reaction from Gautam Adani himself talking about looking forward to a resolution in a time-bound manner. Do you think we will be able to conclude this investigation, have all the inputs and the results, within a couple of months? I mean, what is the expectation when it comes to the kind of time horizon we're looking at here?
Well, normally my experience of committees and commissions are that they do extend. So I am not in a position, and especially since it hasn't even begun, I'm not really in a position to say as to whether they'll be able to stick to a time-bound manner. But these are individuals of high expertise, proven track records, high credentials, and also very particular about how they are viewed in the world. So I see, and I believe that there will be a combined effort to come out with a cogent, sensible report as soon as possible.
What are the possible ramifications in terms of the threat or the risk to the banking system if